So just like you, I've been a student all my life, spending countless hours, days, and weeks studying and failing just to study again. I got pretty sick of this painful routine, so I decided to look into the science of learning so that I can improve myself. So after spending hours and hours reading books, blogs, research papers, and watching dozens of videos from experts, I found the 5 most effective ways to study, especially if it's for a standardized test. So learning can essentially be broken down into just 2 stages: understanding the material and remembering it. Obviously, this sounds a lot simpler than it actually is, so let's break it down into smaller chunks. First, let's focus on the understanding component of the equation. The first step to understanding what you read is by planning ahead. As students, we just love pushing things off and leaving them to the last minute. I understand that some of us might just function better that way, or it just might be too much effort for you to push yourself to get started sooner. I'm exactly like that, but I decided to implement this one little trick that has improved my grades significantly over the past few years. I found that the simple act of going through the syllabus of a specific class a couple days or just a week before classes start can change your grades entirely. To spend a couple minutes flipping through the first few pages of your textbook, go ahead and read the topics and subtopics and map out what to expect during your next class. This will give you a high-level overview of what to expect and put you ahead of the rest of the class. As you go through each topic and subtopic, write down 3 to 5 initial thoughts, comments, or questions as you get your first impressions on the course material. These questions don't have to be super complicated at first. They can be as simple as what is X or what is Y, just so you pique that curiosity in your brain and you get more eager to learn. Just the act of mapping out what to expect before each lecture will definitely increase your productivity. This allows you to increase your understanding of the content material as you go through your lectures. You'll be able to form synapses in your brain connecting topics or subtopics or even concepts explained throughout the lectures. When you eventually study the material, make sure to answer these questions even though they might seem small, simple, or stupid. You can always dive deeper later, but make sure to make this a habit by practicing writing down questions during your lectures just to make your brain curious and ask more questions, which piques an interest of understanding the material. This obviously ensures you don't get lost throughout the lecture and you have a massive head start. The next step I have is to stop taking notes. Taking notes in the traditional sense by transcribing what the lecturer said word for word, highlighting the course notes, or summarizing them into your own words is just not good enough. You want to be able to replace these old techniques with a more efficient and productive technique, that is asking questions. During your lecture, make sure to write down questions on what you found interesting, what you want to learn more about, or what you just didn't understand at all. These questions will help you to narrow down the focus of your study sessions later on, and during those sessions, you can go into as much detail as you want when answering those questions. You can definitely use resources like the textbook, lecture slides, the internet, AI to help you answer these questions, but make sure you're understanding it. Trust me, you want to form these answers in a way that makes sense to you, just so you can understand it and remember it later on. Sometimes the questions are pretty straightforward and easy to answer. However, the other times where the questions are longer, more complicated, or deeper, it might take longer for you to answer the questions in a way that makes sense to you. So I recommend using techniques like the Pomodoro technique so that you stay focused. The beauty of this technique is that you are able to customize the focus and break periods to suit your attention span. Go ahead and play around with the numbers, figure out what works best for you, and stick with it. Another technique I recommend is the Feynman technique. This is just a simple technique where you teach the information to yourself in a way that you understand, and then you go ahead and summarize that knowledge in layman's terms and try to teach it to a 5-year-old. Obviously, not everyone has access to a 5-year-old, so go ahead and grab your friend, family member, and explain it to them in simple terms. Most of the time, the simpler the language you use, the better. As long as you yourself understand the complexity behind those words, then you're gonna be fine. Alright, now that we got the understanding component of the equation down, let's focus on the remembering part. The simplest and most effective way to remember or memorize things is through active recall. Active recall is just a fancier way of saying testing or quizzing ourselves. It's a very commonly used technique to remember or memorize things. If there's only going to be one study tip that you're going to take away from this video, please let it be this one. Numerous studies have proven time and time again that there's a direct correlation between testing yourself and academic performance. Statistically and historically, the more you test yourself, the better you're going to do. I personally believe this goes a level higher, where there's a direct correlation between learning and testing yourself, but I'll leave that for a different video. These tests don't have to be standardized tests. They can be as simple as questions you ask yourself on a day-to-day basis. Again, as the questions get deeper or more specific, your comprehension of the topic is going to increase. This might be obvious to you, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's not true. Now, there are definitely many ways you can do this. You could take the traditional route with pen and paper through the Cornell note-taking technique, or you could use fancy apps like Notion, Anki, RevNote, or even Quizlet. Now, I personally use an Excel sheet when I first got started. I listed out all the questions in column A and all the answers in column B. I eventually then invested in apps like Notion and Anki. I personally prefer Anki because it incorporates another effective studying technique, which I'll talk about later. However, the main takeaway here is to test yourself more, even if it's as simple as just asking yourself a question. Just as the saying goes, the more shots you take, the higher the chances are of you hitting the target. Alright, the next technique is known as spatial repetition. So some of you might be familiar with the concept of the forgetting curve, or how our memory works in general. Basically, the forgetting curve is a curve describing how our memory works over a period of time. So let's say, for example, in day 1, you try to remember a definition or a concept and your memory is at 100%. In day 2, if you don't do anything to recall that concept or definition, your memory is going to drop by about 50%. This repeats for day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to day N, where you eventually forget. The goal of spatial repetition is to wait till you've almost forgotten that specific concept or definition and to pair it with active recall so that you can test yourself at a given point where your memory is the weakest, so you can put in the most effort to recalling that thing. Over time, the strength of your memory for this specific concept will grow if you keep repeating the process. The next effective study tip I have is to mix things up. This one took me quite a while to fully understand, but there's a lot of studies that have shown that the simple act of mixing things up during your study sessions can make them significantly more effective. You can do this by intertwining subtopics or topics during your study sessions, just so you don't fully rely on muscle memory. The goal here is to simulate an actual exam environment where everything is not just coherent and laid out perfectly for you. This will help you enhance your motor skills and be able to adjust for variations that might come. This forces you to truly understand the material instead of just relying on rote memorization. The last tip I have is to make it a routine. Overall, the more effort you put into learning, the longer it's gonna stick, and you're probably gonna get the most value out of it altogether. I know this definitely seems hard to most of us, but if you truly wanna do better in your tests, consistency is gonna have to be your best friend. There are so many books, blogs, articles, and resources out there talking about how to make a habit stick, but I personally prefer The Atomic Habit by James Clear. In his book, he talks about the 4 laws of how to make a habit stick in a lot of detail, so if that's something you're interested in, feel free to check it out. Regardless though, if your want or intent isn't strong enough, these study tips or hacks won't be enough. Personally, for me, beginning with the end in mind or remembering why I'm studying in the first place definitely helps. If your intent is truly there, the fear of failing overpowers the friction of getting started. Also, the more you use these tips, the lesser the friction, the easier it's going to be for you to get started. Eventually, all of this will be second nature and you'll be pulling out your flashcards during lunch, or you'll be whipping out your lecture notes a couple minutes before class to jot down some questions. Again, if you haven't noticed, the theme here is practice and reiteration. Just like mathematics, the more you practice, the better you're gonna get. If you manage to leverage the skills mentioned in this video, I'm confident you'll notice a significant improvement in your studies. Oftentimes, I notice that most people avoid studying because they don't know how to learn or they just don't want to study. If you fit in either one of these boxes, I hope this video brought you some value and you're now able to get going. As always, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, feel free to leave them down below. If you stayed all the way to the end, I would personally like to wish you all the best and thank you for your time. Also, feel free to subscribe if you like the content. I personally post a video every single week, so stay tuned. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.